Experience. I'm Mike.
And I'm Mark. If you listen to part one, you know how Abraham Lincoln went from a dirt floor cabin in Kentucky to winning the presidency in 1860. Now comes the actually hard part. Being president during the worst crisis in American history.
And before we dive in, quick request that actually matters. If you're enjoying these deep dives into history through mechanisms rather than just memorizing dates and dead people's names, tell a friend about this podcast, share an episode, leave a review wherever you listen. We're trying to build something genuinely different here.
We're not sponsored by anyone. We're not backed by some massive media company. This grows through you telling people about it. So if you think someone would enjoy this, send it to them.
Seriously, send it to that person who thinks history is boring. Recitation of facts will prove them wrong in the next 30 minutes.
All right, so what mechanisms are we exploring today? Because that's what makes this more than just biography.
6 major ones. First, the cabinet rivals management mechanism, how Lincoln surrounded himself with people who genuinely thought they should be president instead of him and somehow made it work without everyone resigning or killing each other.
Second, the legitimacy squeeze mechanism operating in constitutional grey zones during emergencies without completely destroying democratic norms. How do you bend the rules to save the system without breaking the system you're trying to save?
Third, the slow burn radicalization mechanism, how Lincoln went from moderate who just wanted to preserve the Union to the great emancipator who fundamentally transformed what America meant.
Fourth, the military learning curve mechanism, teaching yourself how to be commander-in-chief with zero military experience while actively losing battles and watching people die.
Fifth, the coalition trap, but the wartime version, managing radicals who wanted immediate total abolition, moderates who wanted gradual careful change, conservatives who just wanted the war to end on any terms, and border states that might switch sides if you move too fast.
And sixth, the successor problem mechanism, why choosing Andrew Johnson as vice president doomed Reconstruction before it even started and betrayed everything Lincoln fought for.
So we're going deep. This isn't just Lincoln won the war, freed the slaves, gave some memorable speeches. This is how political power actually works under maximum imaginable pressure.
And fair warning, we're going to talk about massive casualties, constitutional violations, depression, dead children, and the catastrophic failure of Reconstruction. But we're not going dark and hopeless. We're analysing mechanisms.
Right, so where we left off in part 1, Lincoln takes office March 4th, 1861. 7 states have already seceded. Fort Sumter gets bombarded April 12th. Lincoln calls up 75,000 militia April 15th. 4 more states secede: Virginia, Arkansas, Tennessee, North Carolina. Now it's 11 Confederate states versus 23 Union states plus territories.
And Lincoln has zero military experience. Never commanded troops, never studied strategy. His total military service was a few weeks in the Black Hawk War in 1832, where he saw absolutely no combat.
He later joked that his only battles were against mosquitoes and he generally lost. So now he's supposed to lead a war against professional military officers like Robert E. Lee, who graduated West Point, fought in Mexico, studied warfare his whole career.
This is the military learning curve mechanism. You're thrown into a role you're completely unprepared for, and you either learn faster than seems humanly possible, or you fail catastrophically and people die.
And people are going to die regardless. But the question is whether you learn from the dying or just keep making the same mistakes.
First major battle is First Bull Run in Virginia, July 21st, 1861. Union forces attack Confederate positions near Manassas. Everyone in Washington thinks it'll be a quick, decisive Union victory. Some people literally pack picnic baskets and go watch like it's entertainment.
Which is genuinely insane.
Spectators watching a battle.
And the Union gets absolutely destroyed. Confederate forces counterattack. Union soldiers panic and flee back to Washington in chaos. Spectators are running alongside soldiers. It's total humiliation.
Lincoln realizes at this exact moment, this war is going to be long, brutal, and nothing like anyone expected.
So he starts reading military strategy books obsessively, studying tactics, logistics, force concentration, sending telegrams to generals constantly with questions, suggestions, sometimes direct orders.
He's literally teaching himself how to be commander-in-chief in real time while the country's falling apart and people are dying by the thousands.
And his first massive challenge is finding a general who can actually win battles. He tries. Irvin McDowell loses at Bull Run, immediately fired.
George McClellan, brilliant organizer, charismatic, soldiers love him, but he won't actually fight. Drills the army endlessly, prepares perfectly, then refuses to attack because he's always convinced he's outnumbered.
Which drives Lincoln insane. He's got this massive, well-trained army, and McClellan won't use it aggressively.
Then Ambrose Burnside attacks at Fredericksburg in December 1862, gets absolutely slaughtered, 13,000 Union casualties. It's a disaster, fired.
Joseph Hooker loses badly at Chancellorsville in May 1863, despite having twice as many men, fired.
It's like the worst hiring process in history. Revolving door of military failure for 2 solid years.
But here's what Lincoln's learning through this disaster. That military professionalism doesn't guarantee results. That you need generals who will actually fight, not just maneuver. That aggression and willingness to accept casualties sometimes matters more than perfect tactics.
And this is the learning curve. He's figuring out through trial and error what kind of generals work, aggressive ones who will press the enemy even when it's costly.
Meanwhile, he's simultaneously dealing with the cabinet rivals management mechanism, which is maybe even harder than the military situation.
His Secretary of State, William Seward, literally sends him a memo in April 1861. It's called Some Thoughts for the President's Consideration.
And the contents are possibly the most condescending thing ever written by one government official to another.
What's in it?
Basically, Lincoln, you're clearly not ready for this job because you've never governed before and you're overwhelmed. So how about I, William Seward, who should have been president, run the actual government while you figure things out? Also, maybe we should start a war with Spain and France to unite the country against a foreign enemy instead of fighting each other.
I'm sorry, what?
Seward genuinely suggests provoking foreign war to avoid civil war.
And Lincoln's response?
Writes back saying, essentially, thanks for the thoughts, William, but no, I'm actually going to be president. I'll handle the major decisions. You can execute them as Secretary of State, but to be clear, I'm in charge.
And then fires Seward?
No, keeps him in the cabinet because Seward's talented, experienced, represents a crucial faction of the Republican Party, and creating enemies outside the tent is worse than managing rivals inside it.
So the mechanism is accept condescension, assert authority, keep the rival close.
Exactly. You can't fire everyone who doubts you or thinks they're smarter than you. You have to manage egos, leverage talents, maintain control without being dictatorial.
Same thing with Salmon Chase, Treasury Secretary.
Chase thinks he should be president, plots to replace Lincoln in the 1864 election, maneuvers behind the scenes, leaks to newspapers, undermines Lincoln's decisions.
And Lincoln?
Knows about all of it, keeps Chase in cabinet anyway until 1864 when it becomes completely untenable and Chase finally resigns.
Why not just fire him immediately when you discover he's plotting against you?
Because Chase represents the radical Republican faction. If Lincoln fires him too early, he splits the coalition, loses political support, empowers an external enemy who can attack freely.
Better to keep plotting rivals inside where you can watch them.
And use them and play them against each other when necessary. Lincoln actually got skilled at this. He'd leak different versions of policies to different cabinet members, see who leaked what to which newspaper, identify the backstabbers.
That's exhausting.
Governing is exhausting. But the alternative is losing control of your own administration.
All right, so it's 1861, 1862. War's going terribly for the Union militarily. What's Lincoln's biggest political problem beyond just losing battles?
The slavery question. Because remember, the war starts as a war to preserve the Union, not to end slavery. That was explicit.
Right. He said repeatedly he had no intention of interfering with slavery where it existed.
August 1862, Horace Greeley, editor of the New York Tribune, publishes this open letter to Lincoln called The Prayer of 20 Millions, demanding he make the war about emancipation.
And Lincoln writes back publicly, and this letter is crucial. My paramount object in this struggle is to save the Union, and is not either to save or to destroy slavery. If I could save the Union without freeing any slave, I would do it. And if I could save it by freeing all the slaves, I would do it. And if I could save it by freeing some and leaving others alone, I would also do that.
Which sounds cold and calculating to modern ears. Like he doesn't care about slavery morally at all.
But it's strategic positioning. He cannot afford to lose the border states. Kentucky, Missouri, Maryland, Delaware, They're slave states that stayed in the Union barely.
If he makes the war explicitly about ending slavery immediately, they might secede and the Union loses critical territory, manpower, resources, and geographic position.
Plus, Kentucky was where he was born. Losing it would be
Pressures building
symbolically
from every
and
direction
strategically
simultaneously. Abolitionists are furious. He's not ending slavery. Radical Republicans in Congress are passing confiscation acts to seize Confederate property, including enslaved people. Enslaved people themselves are escaping to Union lines by the thousands, forcing the issue.
So what does he try?
He tests different approaches, proposes compensated emancipation, border states voluntarily abolish slavery, federal government pays slaveholders for the loss of their property. It all happens gradually over time.
And
Almost nobody accepts it. Slaveholders don't want to give up their property even with compensation. Abolitionists think it's paying people for crimes. It goes nowhere. Then he floats colonization schemes, the idea that freed black Americans should be resettled in Africa or Central America to start new colonies.
which is both racist and completely impractical.
Logistically impossible, morally wrong, but he's desperately trying to find a politically acceptable way to end slavery that won't fragment his coalition.
And then what?
Summer 1862, he decides privately he's going to issue an Emancipation Proclamation declaring slaves in Confederate states free, but he can't announce it after a military defeat. It'll look disparity like a last-ditch move by a losing side.
So he's got this proclamation written, sitting in his desk drawer, waiting.
Waiting for a Union victory. And waiting. And waiting. Battles keep going badly. McClellan's being too cautious. Burnside gets slaughtered. Lincoln's holding this document that could change history, but the timing's wrong.
Then, September 17, 1862, Battle of Antietam in Maryland.
Bloodiest single day in American history. About 23,000 total casualties killed, wounded, missing in one day.
Technically, it's a draw militarily, but Lee retreats back into Virginia, so Lincoln counts it as enough of a Union victory.
5 days later, September 22nd, 1862, he issues the preliminary Emancipation Proclamation, announces that as of January 1st, 1863, all enslaved people in states still in rebellion will be declared forever free.
Now, it's limited in scope. Doesn't free enslaved people in border states loyal to the Union. Doesn't free enslaved people in Confederate areas already under Union control like parts of Louisiana and Tennessee.
It's a military order framed as war necessity, not a blanket moral decree. He's using his war powers as commander-in-chief.
But it's still enormous. It fundamentally redefines what the war is about.
Now, it's not just about preserving the Union, it's about ending slavery. And this changes everything diplomatically. Britain and France have been seriously considering recognising the Confederacy as a legitimate independent nation, maybe even intervening militarily to break the Union blockade.
But now they can't. Public opinion in Europe is strongly anti-slavery. Britain abolished slavery in 1833. France in 1848. Publicly supporting a slave-holding rebellion becomes politically impossible for European governments.
The proclamation also explicitly allows black men to enlist in the Union Army and Navy for the first time.
And they do in massive numbers. By the end of the war, about 180,000 black soldiers serve in the Union Army specifically, plus another 20,000 or so in the Navy.
About 10% of Union forces. They fight, they die in disproportionate numbers because Confederate forces often execute black soldiers rather than taking them prisoner, and they help win the war.
Lincoln later said the Emancipation Proclamation was the central act of his administration and his whole soul was in it.
But he didn't get there immediately. This is the slow burn radicalization mechanism in action.
Which we need to talk about because Lincoln's evolution on slavery and race is genuinely complicated.
He didn't wake up one day in 1862 feeling morally enlightened and decide to free the slaves. He was pushed toward emancipation by accumulating pressures, events, arguments, and strategic calculations.
Battlefield losses making it clear the war would be long, abolitionist pressure from people like Frederick Douglass and radical Republicans in Congress, European diplomatic concerns about intervention, the strategic logic of undermining the Confederacy's entire labour system, encountering escaped slaves who were already freeing themselves.
All of it accumulated and shifted his thinking step by step.
And his views on racial equality evolved too, though historians disagree about how far and how fast.
In the 1850s, during the Lincoln-Douglas debates, he's explicitly saying he doesn't support social or political equality between races. By April 1865, just before he dies, he's publicly suggesting some black men, particularly those who served in the military or are educated, should get the right to vote.
Which sounds incredibly limited by modern standards. But in 1865 America, even that's considered dangerously radical by many whites, North and South.
And honestly, we don't know how far his views would have continued evolving if he'd lived. Some historians think he was on a trajectory towards supporting full equality. Others think he would have remained moderate. We just don't know.
But the mechanism is clear. He didn't start with the end point. He arrived at it through accumulating experiences, pressures, moral reasoning, and political calculations.
Frederick Douglass visited the White House multiple times, argued with Lincoln directly about racial equality. Black soldiers proving their courage changed white opinions, including Lincoln's. The logic of emancipation itself, if slavery is evil enough to fight a war over, how can you deny equality to freed people?
This is how political leaders actually evolve, not through sudden moral awakenings, through gradual shifts driven by reality, advocates, events, and reasoning.
All right, so January 1st, 1863, the Emancipation Proclamation officially takes effect. Lincoln signs it and, according to witnesses, says, "If my name ever goes into history, it will be for this act, and my whole soul is in it."
But the war's still going terribly militarily. He's still cycling through generals like, as you said, a bad dating app.
Wait, what was I? Oh, right. Ambrose Burnside loses at Fredericksburg, December 1862. 14,000 Union casualties. Absolute disaster. Lincoln replaces him with Joseph Hooker,
who then loses at Chancellorsville, May 1863, despite having twice as many soldiers. Another disaster.
And then Lee invades the North, and it genuinely looks like the Confederacy might win.
But July 1st through 3rd, 1863, Battle of Gettysburg, Pennsylvania, largest battle of the war. George Meade, who Lincoln just appointed like a week earlier, manages to hold the Union position. Lee's forced to retreat back to Virginia.
And the exact same day, Lee's retreating from Gettysburg, July 4th, Ulysses S. Grant captures Vicksburg, Mississippi after a brutal siege. This effectively splits the Confederacy in half along the Mississippi River.
Finally, two major Union victories simultaneously. The tide's starting to turn.
And Lincoln's learning. This is the military learning curve in action. He's figuring out what kind of generals actually fight. Grant's a good example. Grant had failed as a businessman, struggled with alcohol, was seen as rough and unpolished by West Point types.
Wait, was Grant actually a drunk, or is that exaggerated?
He had problems with alcohol, especially when bored or separated from his wife. But whether he was actively drunk during the war is debated. Some historians think it's exaggerated by his enemies.
But the stereotype is that Lincoln said, "I can't spare this man. He fights." When people complain about Grant's drinking,
that's probably apocryphal, but the sentiment's real. Lincoln cared more about results than reputation. Grant won battles. That mattered more than polish.
So the learning curve is prioritize aggression and results over professionalism and caution.
And Lincoln also learned you have to personally manage the war effort, not just delegate to supposed experts. He's directly involved in strategic planning, logistics, force deployment.
November 19th, 1863. Lincoln goes to Gettysburg for dedication of the military cemetery, and he gives the Gettysburg Address.
Edward Everett, this famous orator, speaks for 2 hours, goes through detailed blow by blow of the battle, classical references, the whole performance.
Then Lincoln speaks for about 2 minutes. 272 words total, 10 sentences.
And it's maybe the most perfectly structured short speech in English. 77 years ago dates America not to the Constitution in 1787, but to the Declaration in 1776 with its equality language.
Now we are engaged in a great civil war, testing whether that nation or any nation so conceived and so dedicated can long endure.
He's reframing the war. It's not just about preserving the Union or even ending slavery. It's a test of whether democracy itself can survive.
The world will little note, nor long remember what we say here, but it can never forget what they did here.
Which turned out to be hilariously wrong. Everyone remembers the speech. Almost nobody remembers what the soldiers did at Gettysburg specifically.
And he ends with that this nation under God shall have a new birth of freedom, and that government of the people, by the people, for the people, shall not perish from the earth.
New birth of freedom, not just preserving the old Union, but creating something fundamentally new.
And initially, nobody really notices. Some newspapers praise it, some ignore it, some criticize it as too short or inappropriately brief for the occasion.
But over time, it becomes probably the most famous speech in American history because it captures what the war means at a level deeper than tactics or politics or even slavery. It's about democracy's survival.
All right, so it's late 1863. Lincoln's got 2 military victories. Emancipation Proclamation is changing the war's meaning. What about politics?
He's constantly managing the coalition trap. Radical Republicans want harsher policies against the South, immediate full equality for freed people, confiscation of Confederate property, no mercy.
Conservative Republicans want lenient terms to bring the South back quickly. Gradual change, reconciliation over punishment.
War Democrats support the war effort, but many oppose emancipation. They're fine with fighting to preserve the Union, but not to end slavery.
And peace Democrats, called Copperheads, want to negotiate an end to the war, even if it means Confederate independence.
So Lincoln's managing all these factions simultaneously. Everyone's mad at him for different reasons.
Plus, he's already thinking about Reconstruction. What happens after the war ends? How do you bring Southern states back into the Union?
December 1863, he announces his Reconstruction plan, the 10% plan. If 10% of a Confederate states voters from 1860, so before secession, take an oath of loyalty to the Union, they can form a new state government and rejoin.
Radical Republicans think this is way too lenient. They want military occupation, land redistribution to freed people, guaranteed black voting rights, punishment for Confederate leaders.
But Lincoln's thinking long term. Punishing the South too harshly will breed resentment and make reunification harder. He wants reconciliation, not revenge.
Of course, he dies before implementing any of this, so we'll never know how well it would have worked. Which brings us eventually to the successor problem mechanism.
Right, but we're not there yet. It's 1864 election year, and Lincoln's popularity is absolutely terrible.
The war's been dragging on for 3 years at this point. Casualties keep mounting. People are exhausted, broke, demoralized.
And his own party seriously considers replacing him. There's a movement to dump Lincoln for someone else, maybe Salmon Chase, maybe John C. Fremont.
Some Republicans literally tried to nominate a different candidate at the convention.
But Lincoln fights for the nomination and wins it. Then for vice president, he makes a fateful decision. He replaces Hannibal Hamlin with Andrew Johnson.
Andrew Johnson, a Democrat from Tennessee.
War Democrat, Southern Democrat, who opposed secession when Tennessee seceded, stayed loyal to the Union, served as military governor of Tennessee.
But why would Lincoln pick a Democrat as vice president?
Coalition management. He's trying to signal that the Republican Party is actually a national union party that includes loyal Democrats. Johnson's a Southern Unionist. Shows that not all Southerners are traitors.
This is setting up the successor problem, though.
Massively. Because Johnson's a Southern Democrat who opposed secession but fully supported slavery. He's racist even by 1860 standards. He has no commitment to black rights. He's going to be catastrophically wrong for Reconstruction.
But Lincoln doesn't expect to die, so he's not thinking about Johnson actually becoming president. He's thinking about coalition management and electoral strategy.
Which is a lesson about succession planning. You can't just pick vice presidents for political convenience. You have to imagine them actually governing.
Meanwhile, Lincoln's facing George McClellan in the general election.
As a Democrat on a platform that's basically the war's a failure. We should negotiate peace with the Confederacy. Maybe just let them go.
Admitting defeat and accepting disunion.
And Lincoln genuinely thinks he's going to lose. In August 1864, he writes this extraordinary memo. This morning, as for some days past, it seems exceedingly probable that this administration will not be re-elected. Then it will be my duty to so cooperate with the president-elect as to save the Union between the election and the inauguration, as he will have secured his election on such ground that he cannot possibly save it afterwards.
He's planning to work with his successor to try to save the Union before McClellan takes office, because Lincoln thinks McClellan's policies will guarantee Confederate victory.
He seals this memo and has his cabinet sign it without reading it, only reveals what it says after he wins.
But then military situation turns dramatically. September 1864, General Sherman captures Atlanta after months of campaigning through Georgia.
Philip Sheridan wins major victories in Shenandoah Valley in Virginia. Suddenly it looks like the Union's actually going to win, and Lincoln's re-election chances skyrocket.
He wins November 1000, 864 with 55% of popular vote. Carries every Union state except New Jersey, Delaware, and Kentucky. It's a landslide.
Soldiers vote overwhelmingly for Lincoln, even though they're the ones dying. About 78% of soldiers vote for him. They want to finish the war, not negotiate.
And in his second inaugural address, March 4th, 1865, he gives another masterpiece. Talks about the war as divine punishment for the sin of slavery, affecting both North and South equally.
Fondly do we hope, fervently do we pray, that this mighty scourge of war may speedily pass away. Yet, if God wills that it continue until all the wealth piled by the bondsman's 250 years of unrequited toil shall be sunk, and until every drop of blood drawn with the lash shall be paid by another drawn with a sword, as was said 3,000 years ago, so still it must be said the judgments of the Lord are true and righteous altogether.
That's heavy.
It's theological. He's saying the war might be divine judgment for slavery, and if so, it's deserved.
Then he ends with malice toward none, with charity for all, with firmness in the right, as God gives us to see the right, let us strive on to finish the work we are in, to bind up the nation's wounds.
He could have been triumphalist, could have gloated. The Union's winning decisively, the Confederacy's collapsing, he's been completely vindicated.
But instead he's humble, reflective, talking about healing and binding up wounds.
Only 703 words total, shorter than most modern political speeches, but it's profound.
So now it's early 1865, war's ending. What's the final military situation?
Grant's been conducting this brutal campaign against Lee's Army of Northern Virginia since spring 1864. The Overland Campaign Wilderness, Spotsylvania, Cold Harbor, Union casualties are staggering.
Some people call Grant a butcher because he just keeps attacking despite losses.
But Grant understands what Lincoln understands. The Union has more men and resources. If both sides lose equally in battles, the Confederacy runs out first. It's math.
That's dark.
War is dark. Grant's pressing because he knows every battle weakens the Confederacy more than the Union, even if Union casualties are higher in absolute numbers. By April 1865, Lee's army is starving, deserting, collapsing. April 9th, 1865, Appomattox Courthouse, Virginia. Lee surrenders to Grant.
And the terms are remarkably generous.
Grant allows Confederate soldiers to keep their horses for spring planting. Officers can keep their sidearms. Nobody's arrested for treason. They just sign paroles and go home.
Why so generous?
Lincoln wanted reconciliation. Grant understood this. Making the surrender dignified encourages other Confederate armies to surrender peacefully rather than fighting guerrilla warfare indefinitely.
Plus, there's this moment at the surrender. Grant and Lee sit in this parlour, Grant wearing a muddy private's uniform, Lee in full dress uniform. They talk about Mexico, where they'd both served. It's weirdly cordial.
And it works strategically. Other Confederate armies start surrendering. Joseph Johnston surrenders to Sherman in North Carolina, April 26. By end of May, the war's effectively over.
4 years, about 620,000 dead, 2% of the American population.
Equivalent to about 6 million today relative to population. The country's fundamentally transformed.
All right, let's talk about the legitimacy squeeze mechanism, because this is crucial for understanding modern crises.
Lincoln did constitutionally questionable things during the war, suspended habeas corpus, meaning you could be arrested without charges or trial, imposed military rule in border states, censored newspapers that supported the Confederacy, arrested pro-Confederate state legislators.
And Congress wasn't even in session when he did most of this. He just did it unilaterally using executive power.
Which is arguably unconstitutional. But his reasoning was, if the Constitution allows the country to be destroyed, then the Constitution's meaningless. Better to bend it temporarily than let it snap permanently.
So he bent the Constitution so it wouldn't snap.
Exactly. This is the legitimacy squeeze. In a crisis, you have to act fast to save the system, but you can't completely break faith with the system itself.
You're operating in a legal grey zone.
Pushing boundaries without completely shattering democratic norms. So Lincoln does these legally questionable things, but he explains them publicly, defends them in writing, and crucially, seeks retroactive approval from Congress when they reconvene.
The habeas corpus suspension is the most controversial. The Constitution says it can be suspended when in cases of rebellion or invasion the public safety may require it, but doesn't explicitly say who has that power.
Lincoln claims the president can do it because Congress isn't in session and there's an actual rebellion happening. Supreme Court Chief Justice Roger Taney says only Congress can suspend it. Lincoln ignores Taney and does it anyway.
Because from Lincoln's perspective, if he waits for Congress to convene, debate and vote, Maryland might secede and Washington gets cut off from the north.
He has to act immediately to prevent the capital from being surrounded by Confederate territory. So he acts first, justifies later.
Which is dangerous.
Incredibly dangerous. It's how democracies become dictatorships. Executive claiming emergency powers and never giving them up. He violated norms but maintained democratic accountability. When Democrats won congressional seats in 1862 midterms, he accepted it. When newspapers attacked him, he didn't shut them all down, just the most dangerous pro-Confederate ones. When he thought he might lose re-election in 1864, he planned peaceful transition.
So the mechanism is operate in grey zones when necessary, but maintain transparency, accept criticism, seek retrospective legitimation, and absolutely don't consolidate permanent power.
And modern presidents cite Lincoln's precedent constantly. Bush after 9/11 with the Patriot Act, surveillance, detention without trial. Obama with drone strikes without congressional authorization. Trump with emergency declarations for border wall. Biden with eviction moratoriums during COVID.
Every crisis president faces this squeeze. You need emergency powers, but you can't destroy democratic norms permanently.
And the question is always, are you bending to save the system or breaking to grab power? Lincoln bent, others have broken.
But who decides which is which?
Congress, courts, public opinion, history, which is why transparency and accepting accountability matters. Lincoln explained his actions publicly, let himself be criticised, accepted judicial and congressional pushback when it came.
Okay, but here's a question. Was Lincoln actually depressed throughout the presidency or just sad sometimes?
Wait, why are we debating this?
Because it matters. People throw around depression for any historical figure who was ever sad. Lincoln had legitimate reasons to be sad. His son Willie died. The war was killing people. He was under enormous stress.
No, he had clinical depression. It's well documented from his early life. He called it the hypo, had major depressive episodes before the presidency.
But during the presidency,
he was under constant strain, aged terribly, had insomnia, emotional volatility. Whether that's clinical depression or situational sadness is debated.
See, this is what I mean. We don't know for certain, but we diagnose people posthumously.
Fair point. But the fact that he functioned at such a high level while dealing with grief, stress, and possible depression is remarkable regardless of clinical labels.
Agreed. February 1862, his son Willie dies of typhoid fever. He's 11 years old.
Lincoln and Mary Todd are devastated. Mary stops hosting White House functions for months, wears black for years.
And Lincoln's running a war, managing cabinet rivals, dealing with military failures while grieving his child's death.
Plus, Mary Todd's mental health deteriorates. She's spending excessively, acting erratically, publicly embarrassing him, dealing with her own grief.
The human cost of the presidency is staggering.
Which brings us to the cabinet rivals management mechanism in more depth, because this is genuinely impressive political psychology.
You mentioned the December 1862 crisis where senators tried to force Lincoln to fire Seward.
Right. Radical Republican senators think Seward's too conservative, has too much influence, is preventing Lincoln from being more aggressive on slavery and war policy.
So they meet with Lincoln to demand Seward's removal.
And Lincoln does something brilliant. He invites the senators to return the next evening for another meeting, and he brings the entire cabinet, including Seward, but he doesn't tell the cabinet why they're there.
Oh, no.
Senators start making their case that Seward dominates cabinet discussions and prevents other voices. And Lincoln turns to the cabinet and asks, is this true?
And Chase, who's been backstabbing Seward and encouraging the senators, is trapped. He either has to publicly admit he's been undermining Seward, or he has to defend Seward and make the senators look wrong.
He tries to split the difference, looks dishonest and weak. Senators realise they've been manipulated. Crisis ends.
That's political judo.
Seward offers to resign. Chase offers to resign to save face. Lincoln refuses both resignations, says he needs both of them, keeps the coalition together.
It's like managing a reality TV show, except the stakes of the country's survival.
Basically, The Apprentice, 1861 edition, except everyone's qualified and nobody gets fired on camera.
And Lincoln has to do this constantly. Managing egos, playing rivals against each other, exposing backstabbers, maintaining control while appearing magnanimous.
That's the mechanism. You can't just appoint talented rivals and hope for the best. You have to actively manage them, use their competition productively, make them look bad when they betray you, show strength while being gracious.
That's exhausting.
Governing is exhausting. Photos from 1861 versus 1865. Lincoln looks 20 years older.
He's dealing with military defeats, political attacks from all sides, personal tragedies, death threats, constant newspaper savagery.
And he still manages to hold the cabinet together, win re-election, end slavery, win the war, which makes the successor problem mechanism even more tragic.
All right, the successor problem mechanism, because this is genuinely one of history's great catastrophes.
Lincoln picks Andrew Johnson as vice president in 1864 for coalition reasons. Johnson's a Southern Democrat who stayed loyal to the Union, shows the party's broad appeal.
But Johnson is racist, even by 1860 standards. He's a Southern populist who supported slavery. He hates the planter, aristocracy, but also doesn't support black rights.
And when Lincoln dies, April 15, 1865, which we'll cover in Part 3, Johnson becomes president 6 days after the war ends.
And Reconstruction becomes an absolute catastrophe.
Johnson immediately starts pardoning Confederate leaders, opposes black voting rights, vetoes Reconstruction legislation, gets into open warfare with Congress, eventually gets impeached, though not removed.
Meanwhile, Southern states implement black codes that basically re-enslave freed people through different legal mechanisms.
Vagrancy laws letting police arrest black people for unemployment. Apprenticeship laws letting white employers claim black children. Laws preventing black people from owning property or businesses.
Then Jim Crow segregation. Then systematic disenfranchisement. Then lynching as social control. The promise of emancipation gets systematically betrayed by the government that's supposed to protect it.
So Lincoln wins the war and ends slavery legally, but he doesn't live long enough to ensure those victories mean anything in practice.
This is the successor problem mechanism. A leader achieves something transformative but dies or leaves before consolidating it, and weaker or hostile hands take over and destroy it.
You see this throughout history. Lenin creates the Bolshevik Revolution, dies, Stalin takes over and turns it into totalitarian nightmare. Founders create American democracy with equality language. Their successors allow slavery to expand.
Obama passes the Affordable Care Act. Trump tries to destroy it. Roosevelt builds New Deal coalition. Successors gradually dismantle it.
So leadership succession matters as much as leadership achievement.
And Lincoln made a coalition management decision, picking Johnson, that came back to haunt history. He couldn't have known he'd be assassinated, but the choice had catastrophic consequences.
Now let's synthesize these mechanisms for modern application, because these aren't just historical curiosities. They're patterns that repeat.
Cabinet rivals management applies to any organization. Don't just appoint loyalists who agree with you. Bring in talented people who challenge you but actively manage relationships, expose backstabbers, use competition productively.
Silicon Valley talks about this with brilliant jerks. Do you hire insanely talented people who create drama or competent people who get along? Lincoln shows you can hire brilliant rivals if you actively manage them.
Biden tried this somewhat, brought in progressives and moderates, Harris as VP despite primary clashes, but you have to actually manage those relationships or they fragment.
Military learning curve applies beyond literal warfare. Anytime you're thrown into a role, you're unprepared for new CEO, first-time parent, crisis management, you either learn fast or fail.
And Lincoln shows that learning requires accepting failure as information. He cycled through generals, learned from their mistakes, evolved his understanding.
Slow burn radicalization explains every leader who evolves on major issues. You don't flip overnight. You shift through accumulating pressures, evidence, arguments.
Corporate leaders on climate change went from denial to acceptance to action gradually. Politicians on same-sex marriage evolved over time. Anyone whose position genuinely changes.
And it's important to recognize that evolution's possible and sometimes necessary. Leaders who never change, regardless of new information, are rigid and brittle.
Legitimacy squeezes every crisis leader managing emergency powers. COVID lockdowns, how much executive authority during public health emergencies. Financial crises, how much government intervention. Security threats, how much surveillance is justified.
The squeeze is always, you need extraordinary power to protect people, but extraordinary power threatens the democratic system you're trying to protect. You have to bend without breaking.
Coalition trap is every leader managing contradictory constituencies. You can't satisfy everyone, so you disappoint everyone partially to keep the coalition intact.
Congressional leadership, passing legislation. University presidents balancing donors, faculty, students, activists, corporate leaders managing shareholders, employees, customers, regulators.
And successor problem is why succession planning matters existentially. Who takes over when you leave? Will they continue your work or betray it?
Business founders choosing successors, presidents choosing VPs, non-profit leaders developing next generation. You can do transformative work, but if your successor destroys it, the transformation doesn't stick.
So what does Lincoln's presidency teach us about leadership under maximum pressure?
That you can be completely unprepared for a role and still succeed if you're capable of rapid learning. Lincoln had zero military experience but learned to be an effective commander-in-chief.
That moral evolution is possible. Lincoln wasn't born the great emancipator. He became him through events, pressure, reasoning, and growth.
That managing rivals is often more important than appointing allies. A cabinet of friends might be comfortable, but a cabinet of rivals brings diverse talents and perspectives.
That constitutional systems need flexibility in crises, but flexibility is dangerous. You have to bend without breaking, push boundaries without destroying norms.
And that succession is fate. You can save the Union and free the slaves, but if your successor betrays the vision, the victory is incomplete.
Lincoln's presidency was simultaneously triumph and tragedy. Triumph in what he achieved, preserving the Union, ending slavery, expanding democracy's meaning. Tragedy in what was lost when Andrew Johnson's betrayal meant Reconstruction failed.
Next episode, part 3, will cover the assassination, the conspiracy theories, the immediate aftermath, and how Lincoln's memory gets constructed and weaponized for the next 150 years.
But for now, 4 years of war. 620,000 dead, slavery ended, Union preserved, democracy tested and survived. One president who somehow held it together while learning how to govern under impossible conditions.
And seriously, if this approach to history works for you, mechanisms, instead of just memorizing facts, tell someone about this podcast, share an episode, leave a review. That's how we grow.
Thanks for listening to the Mike and Mark History Experience.